Everybody having a good day? Yeah. Excellent. Best is yet to come, right? So it's my distinct pleasure this afternoon to welcome John Mesko here. And I just want to personally thank John because it's his vision is why we're here today. And that's worthy of applause. Many moons ago, when John was Executive Director of Sustainable Farming Association, he had a vision on bringing soil health to farmers and communities in Minnesota. And one of the first things we came up with is the Midwest Soil Health Summit. And I don't know if this is everything you would hope for. I hope it is. I think it's been a great day. It's been a great success, 7 years of running. John is now Senior Director of Soil Health for the Soil Health Partnership. And I'm going to let him tell you more about that. And so with that, help me welcome John Mesko.
Thank you, Ken. And you know, I don't know if it was my vision. I just remember saying, everybody looking at me saying, we don't have any money to put on this event. What should we do? And I said, we should go ahead and put it on anyway. And so maybe that's my vision. I don't know. It's appropriate that it's already 10 minutes into the time frame that we have here. I prepared a 45-minute presentation for you today, as that was the allotted time that I was given. Now, as executive director of this organization over many years, there were a lot of instances, lots of instances, where I was the one who flexed my speaking time to fit all the things that could possibly go wrong. Like the video not working, or somebody else not in the room who needs to be there, or whatever the case may be. So I've always, don't worry about it, Jerry. I'm supposed to talk for 20 minutes, I'll cut it to 10. I got you covered. I'm supposed to talk for 30, I'll talk for 20. Don't worry about it, Jerry. Jerry, don't worry about it. I'll be here for 45 minutes. We're going to go as long as we need to go. Actually, I'm kidding. I have to be somewhere at 4 o'clock, so I will end up cutting my time again. It's okay. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Kent and Jerry and Teresa and Wayne and everybody that's really had a hand in putting this event on. It is great to be back and great to be with you and talking about soil health. The stories that we've heard here today are fantastic and continue to be inspiring to me, and I know to many of you, and certainly appreciate being able to be with you again today. I've brought with me a couple of colleagues. I'll just introduce them real quickly. Anna Teeter in the back, raise your hand, and Dustin Brooker. They are with me from the Soil Health Partnership. We've got a booth out here, and certainly invite you to engage with them as we go throughout the rest of the day here. My journey to where I am in my career now has been very, very wide, very varied, widely varied. I think many of you may know that I started my career early in the conventional ag world, where I worked for Dow Chemical, which later became Dow AgroSciences, and now is Corteva. I worked in university education. I worked in fertilizer sales and application, chemical application. I've had an opportunity to be a grass-fed beef producer and sold grass-fed beef, pasture pork, and grass-fed lamb locally here in this part of Minnesota, in cities. I have worked for 3 or 4 different nonprofit organizations. I've worked for University Extension and have had quite a wide range of experiences in agriculture. I don't know if that's by design or by luck or just how things happen, but it's been very rewarding for me. And the role that I currently serve as Senior Director for the Soil Health Partnership is really the culmination of all those things. It is an interesting opportunity to serve a wide array of farms in an area that I think we can all agree is the key to a sustainable future for food and farming in this country. And so I'm very, very blessed to be able to do the work that I do every day and with a great team of people that serve in that role. But soil health is getting a lot of attention. Hold on. I don't know. There you go. Okay. So soil health, to a lot of people in this room, soil health doesn't seem like such a new thing. Jerry said we've been doing several of these conferences for many years. A lot of you have been doing soil health farming practices, reduced tillage, cover crops for many, many years. I've heard some of you all the way back into the 80s have been doing this. So it's not really new to a lot of you, but to the wider array of agriculture, it's a whole effort and initiative around soil health practices. And for that, I'll refer to mainly cover crops and reduced tillage and livestock grazing. It's still pretty new. This portion here where I said in the 2000s, that's where, I mean, a lot of this was going on before then, but, you know, Gabe Brown, and I'm just picking on him because he was one of our initial speakers at this event years ago, was one of the key farmers that drew attention nationally to the things he was doing. There's other farms that were doing it at the same time, but farmers led this whole effort in the 2000s and even before. In the 2010s, as Kent was saying, that's really when a lot of the organizations like Sustainable Farming Association launched the Midwest Soil Health Summit. Soil Health Partnership was launched in 2014 as well. NRCS in the mid-2010s really began to talk, at least at the top, about soil health and cover crops, and we saw a big effort in the mid-2010s especially to get this wheel spinning around soil health. And it takes a while. And believe it or not, we're in 2020. I was thinking about that. You know, we say it in 2020, but it just doesn't even seem possible to me. It's 2020 already. But now, I think for the next decade in this conversation, we're really going to be talking a lot more about ecosystem services and climate change, and public policy around soil health is ramping up at an increasing rate. The conversations that I have around this work are increasingly centered on the impact that soil health building practices can have on climate change. Climate change is, in my view, going to be much more talked about than just soil health in the future. So it is a term, it is a issue that resonates much more widely than the farm, and that's what's happening as people begin to understand what can be the impact. But this is an article from resiliency.org. It came out just in January. Soil health hits the big time. I think we all, most of us, would probably have said it's already at the big time. This is nothing new, right? We've been talking about this for a while, but this is what is happening now on a national scale. We talk about what I would say the mainstream, or the middle of America, the heart of the Corn Belt, for example. And in that article, what they talk about is that soil health really, the conversation around soil health really started at the UN Climate Summit in Paris. And we see that in California in 2016, it was the first time that a state legislature defined what healthy soil means, and it's soils that function as a biological system. I got my degree in agronomy in the 80s, and literally the first day of my first agronomy class, the professor stood up and said, "Well, listen, all we care about in here is the soil solution. It's NPK and pH. Micronutrients are okay, organic matter you should probably have more, but really it's all about what's in the soil solution." We did not discuss the soil biology. We didn't discuss anything about anything going on in the soil except what was in the water. And so just in my lifetime, we've seen this huge increase in understanding about what's happening. Also in California, about the time we start seeing a state government really putting in incentives to help farmers adopt some of these practices. And it's going on in other states as well. Here's a map that's from about a year ago that talks about all the activity that's going on in state legislatures to help support and incentivize and really push soil health building practices forward. So this is an indication to the mainstream. This is an indication that it's becoming much more widely discussed and much more widely supported. When I talk about what it means to be in the mainstream, it just means we're talking about commodity crops. It is the main crop that is the main use of our cropland in the United States. It's places like the Corn Belt, and I've got a map that I'll show you that. We're talking about farms that represent thousands of acres, not hundreds of acres. And really it's a discussion of, is it small changes on large pieces of land that make a difference, or is it large changes on small pieces of land? And that's really the discussion that is kind of distinguishes the work that most of us are doing. Some folks are working to see small changes on large numbers of acres, and some of us are looking for those big changes on small numbers of acres. I would say that the people in this room are, all of you, even if you're not using these practices right now, the fact that you're here means you're an early adopter. You're definitely in the early stage of adoption of these practices. But in the mainstream, we're talking about second and third tier adoption. And I've got a chart for that too, I want to show you. This is county bushels of corn produced by county in the United States in 2018. I can show you this map every year. It's going to look pretty much the same. The dark green, when we say Corn Belt, we say the heart of commodity agriculture, that's the area we're talking about. Doesn't mean that areas outside of that don't matter. It just means that that's where a tremendous amount of corn and soybeans and the associated impacts of those crops are taking place. There's no question that the bulk of production is there, but also the bulk of the environmental impact is there as well. And so consequently, this is where the interest in some of those environmental impacts rests. It's important to keep in mind, I've got a map a little bit later that'll show you where the organization that I work for, where our work is centered, and it pretty much follows that same outline. One of the things that I think you probably have experienced it, those lands that are outside of this highly productive framework, those are farms where a lot of these practices are more readily implemented, because it's a situation where that farm needs to make a change or is looking for an opportunity to increase that productivity. Some of these lands that are in central Iowa and central Illinois, it's really hard to talk to these farmers about putting cover crops or reducing tillage. You go to somebody that averages 280 bushels per acre of corn every year, they're not really that interested in you telling them, well, I think you can get a better yield or you can save some money. It's very challenging to reach out to those folks, even though they could possibly benefit. So just using cover crop adoption as a measuring stick for how soil health building practices are being adopted, okay, just using cover crops. These are the top 10 states in 2017 that have seen an increase in the acreage of cover crops. And so if you think about that previous map, we've got Iowa at 156% increase. Indiana, they were already pretty high, actually. Missouri, 116%. Nebraska, over 100. Ohio, over 100. Illinois, 122%. Right? These are very high percentages of increase. Okay, doubling in most cases. Minnesota's not on this map, or on this chart, I should say. Over here, we have percent of cropland acreage. This is the interesting thing. We might see a doubling, let's say in Nebraska, but only 3% of the acres in Nebraska have cover crops on. We're still a long ways away. If you look at those states that were in that chart before, that would be Nebraska, Indiana, Iowa, Illinois. You're looking at 3, 4, 5% cover crops in those states. So even though we might have places here or in the Dakotas, or there's some places in Maryland that we were just talking about over lunch where there's cover crops everywhere, it's just not the case in the heart of the Corn Belt. And this is cover crop adoption in 2017. Again, using cover crops as the measuring stick for soil health. Probably not fair, but I think we'd see some similar if we use some of the other practices. The key thing here is the U.S. total is only 5.6% of cropland with cover crops. You can see some of the more, what I would call, I don't want to say less productive acres on the East Coast are where there are a lot of people, a lot of consumers interested in what's happening to their environment, and there's a lot of regional pressure to make changes in that. You can see that's where a lot of the adoption is taking place, or higher percentages of cover crops in those areas. But again, in that central area, central Corn Belt, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, not very much, less than 5% across the board. So we got a ways to go. This is a chart about the adoption curve. Now this is generic. It could be adopting a new technology, it could be adopting cell phones or GMOs, or it could be any kind of new technology you want to adopt, all right? And I would say, think about, for the purposes of this discussion, think about adopting a change in farming practices that leads to soil health, to better soil health. Just think about that as the adopter. I would say everybody in this room is in this innovator or early adopter category. The innovators are people who, they don't need anybody to tell them this is a thing. They're the ones that are doing it because they just like to do new things. They're the same people who are trying new things in other areas of their lives, right? Not just with their farming practice. They're by nature an innovative person. Early adopters are folks who very quickly see what's happening with the innovators. Maybe an early adopter needs to come to one of these conferences and learn about what's happening. Maybe. But they're going to see pretty quickly what's happening. They'll be able to identify for themselves how that new technology or new practice is going to make a difference. The early majority, these are folks who, it's a large group of people, a third of the people in this graph. They're the ones who are going to have a set of criteria in their head as for why this, at what point this becomes something they want to try. Some people will say, in relation to cover crops, for example, or these practices, they might say it has to do with the amount of net return I can make on my farm making these choices. It might be another criteria. Maybe it depends on how many of my neighbors are interested in this. It depends on what my family members or my landlord or multiple landlords want to do. This is the decision-making factor. So there's multiple things in here that this group is deciding. I would say there's probably, just having met many of you, and many of you that I already know, there's probably not very many early majority people here. If you're at this conference and you're having these kinds of conversations around 12, 20, and 30 species cover crops, this is definitely not early majority stuff. This is early adopter stuff. The people that I work with in the Soil Health Partnership are generally more in this early majority category. People who are observing what's happening, they're reading the articles in the newspaper, they've been to some conferences, but they're still not exactly ready to make a big change in their operation. Now, the late majority people, another third of the group, these folks are going to probably require some external pressure. They're probably going to need a little push, maybe a regulation that requires them to plant a buffer strip or something like that. It may require some kind of external push, maybe a landlord that says, if you don't reduce tillage, I'm not renting my land to you anymore. It's going to require some external pressure to get them over the hump. The laggards are never going to adopt the practice. They'll go out of business before they adopt the practice. How many people have parents that are like in their 80s and they don't have a cell phone? All right? Yes. Okay, so they're never going to get one. They're never going to get one unless maybe if the phone company says you can't have a landline, we're cutting it off, it's not going to work anymore. That might be the only way they're going to come around. And the same thing is true here. This is when these people will change when they're no longer farming, when the next generation is farming, or when they have passed away completely, then that land will be converted. So we don't really spend a lot of time worried about the laggards. They're going to be what they're going to be. We actually realize the late majority is going to require that external push. We don't do that, and I know that nobody here is doing that. It's really this 1/3 of the population that's in that early majority that we want to try and influence. Soil Health Partnership was formed a little over 5 years ago now. We have an interesting mix of partners that have come together to form this. I work for the National Corn Growers Association. All the employees of the Soil Health Partnership are employees of National Corn Growers. However, we only get about 10 to 15% of our budget from the corn growers. We're required to go out, raise funds from all manner of sponsors and grants and other funders that we can achieve. So this group of partners right here came together. Bayer Crop Science, which used to be Monsanto before they were bought out by Bayer, the Nature Conservancy, the National Corn Growers, the National Wheat Foundation, and the Environmental Defense Fund are all groups that have come together to form this thing. Now, if you think about it, that's a pretty interesting, eclectic group of people and organizations. We have a major ag biotech company. We've got two major environmentally facing organizations, and we've got two commodity groups. all coming together to work on this as one group. I'm not going to tell you that everything's just rosy, peachy keen across the board, but I will tell you that from my early days in industry and the 20 years that transpired in the middle to my new re-entrance into this sphere, there's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of change in how businesses and organizations that are working in the commodity world, in row crop agriculture, how they view the environment, how they view the responsibility of farmers to take ownership, or how their practices impact the environment, and how they want to play in the space of assisting that discussion. It's very interesting. It's a very, I have met some of the most interesting people and the most dynamic people among these groups. Another group of funders that we have are the state corn groups. There's only a couple on here because these are probably the two states that are among the highest in terms of the amount of money we receive from them. But most of the states we work in, we have the State Corn Growers Association. In some cases, it's the Corn Soybean Association or the Corn Wheat Growers, whatever it is, working together to support our work. Both in Minnesota and Iowa, we receive a fair amount of funding from those groups. We have had historically a tremendous amount of funding from General Mills. The Foundation for Food and Ag Research is funding us at a considerable level as well. We're putting in a grant to them later this fall. We've received a number of USDA and RCS grants. We just received a $2.4 million SIG grant earlier this year. Working out the details on that. We'll be applying for another one here in a few weeks. And the Walton Family Foundation has been with us from the start, really helping to keep that sustained support going. We have an organization. Let's see, what's the next one? Oh, this is just pointing out how we've worked with state corn groups to help us. I'll get to our numbers a little bit later. So we started about 5 years ago with this whole notion, again, the audience being ag business, ag supply chain folks, environmentally facing NGOs, commodity groups. Like 5 years ago, it's all brand new. Soil health brand new. You know, they don't even know who Gabe Brown is. People don't know who you are. They don't know who SMA is. They're completely not on the radar. All they're thinking about is corn and soybeans as much, as fast as we can grow it. And they start reading articles in Farm Journal. They start reading articles in the Furrow. They start reading stuff coming out of NRCS, like soil health. What are we talking about? So they set about to answer for them. What is soil health? How do we measure soil health? I could have a whole 2-hour conversation about this. This is a very controversial topic right now. How is soil health measured? What are the components of soil health, and how do we go about measuring? What is the value of soil health? So that was kind of the goals that we set out to measure. We have, as an organization, we've begun to really center around this similar definition that I referred to earlier. Healthy soil functions as a living ecosystem. And we, among other things, we've identified some key soil health indicators that we measure and that we report on with our research across the space that we're doing our work in. What have we learned? Well, we've learned a lot about data collection and analysis. We talk about soil health going into the mainstream. The next battleground, if you will, is the data. Who owns the data? You know, if you punch in your home address, if you live in town, okay, maybe if you live in the country, if you live in town and you punch in your home address onto the internet, up pops a picture of your front door. And if there's a lawnmower in the front yard, there's your lawnmower. If your kid's in the front yard, there's your kid. I mean, it's publicly available information that's available to anybody. So what about information on farms that can be gathered from a satellite, or from somebody just driving by, or from an organization that gets a grant from the government to do soil sampling, and they're required to turn in a GPS coordinate for every soil sample that's taken? So this is the next battleground around this conversation. We're talking about large amounts of data that, for some in the conversation, would like to think of all of the data being publicly available, particularly if it can be obtained without setting foot on the farm. And along the way, there's an awful lot of technology being developed to assess what's happening on farms without setting foot on the farm. So some people see that as a good thing, some people see that as less than good. We know soil health when we see it. I think that's been a big part of our conversation here today. I think if you walked on a healthy soil, you can tell it. We have a ton of anecdotal evidence about the impact of these practices. We've also learned, as I was saying earlier, that the climate change discussion is rapidly becoming a bigger part of this. It's not so much to the non-farming community, to the environmental facing community, to the public policy community. It's not about how is your farm improving, it's how can the improvements on your farm impact climate change on a global scale. That's what we are really dealing with. For the sake of time, I'll skip that. This is a soil health partnership. We have over 200 research sites on working farms throughout the United States, 16 different states, and that's that same kind of outline that we had up there earlier. So we have a number of sites in what we call the I states or in the Corn Belt. We also have a growing interest out in Maryland. We have Kentucky and Tennessee. We're in there right now trying to get farmers signed up to take our research on there. In most of these states, we partner with as I said, the State Corn Group, or one of the commodity groups. The Nature Conservancy has been a big supporter in a lot of these states. Sometimes the State Department of Agriculture or one of the other NGOs in that community are helping us to pull resources together so we can put people on the ground in those states. And what we do, this is our team. So we have, I think there's 21 or 22 people on this slide. We have a couple of other contractors. Our program is 1/3 of the staff of the corn growers. And I tell people that work at the corn growers, did you realize that our program is 1/3 of the employees of this organization? And they look at me like, no, I didn't realize that. The point of that is that this is a pretty serious investment that this commodity group and others are interested in making in trying to understand and deliver solutions around soil health as it relates to individual farms and U.S. agriculture as a whole. So the corn growers, as you all know, is involved in producing more corn and finding more uses for corn, and they're also realizing that as an organization they need to take responsibility for the impacts of all that on the environment. So I really, as I said, we've come a long ways in influencing this organization and this conference, but also a lot of other folks in influencing U.S. agriculture, U.S. commodities to take responsibility for this, and this is a big effort. What we do, I should just tell you briefly, what we do as an organization is we, through our field team, and Dustin and Ann are here as a couple of examples. A farmer may come to us with a research question they want to answer. What is the impact of cover crops on my farm? What is the impact of reduced tillage? Maybe it's something like a nutrient management question or manure management. Could be livestock grazing. We have a few sites where we're looking at that. And our field team will work with them to come up with a research protocol that they can use to implement that practice and test that practice over a 3, 4, 5 year period of time. We've started to sign up the next round of that, so we've got 5-year data on a lot of farms. We're extending some of those now to 10 years, so we'll have more data to begin to evaluate those practices. And then we monitor those changes by doing real measurements on farm soil tests over time. We had in one of the earlier conversations, we were talking about the nutrition and the health aspect related to soil health, farming, local food, this sort of thing. Really, when we talk about evaluating soil health and the impact of practices, the story I tell, I get asked a question that I can't answer today. I get asked on Capitol Hill, in state corn grower association meetings, by a lot of non-farm related funders, how many dollars per acre is it going to benefit a farmer to plant a cover crop? Or how many dollars per acre will they save if they go to no-till? What's the impact on the bottom line so we can get these farmers to start adopting these practices? Well, you all know it's not that simple. A cover crop is not a cover crop, is not a cover crop. A farm is not a farm, is not a farm. A location in the north versus one in the south. Somebody was saying, Dustin was telling me that he's going to get a t-shirt that says, we're too far north. It doesn't matter where you wear it. If you're in Kansas, oh, we're too far north for cover crops. You know, if you're in northern Minnesota, we're too far north. So we hear that a lot. What I would liken it to is a medical example. If we have a symptom, if you got symptoms, right, in your body, and you go to the doctor, and you say, Doc, something's wrong, I don't know. What's the doctor going to do? Let's do some tests. Let's pull some samples of your blood, right? We'll pull some samples, we'll do some analysis, and we'll make some recommendations. Here's a prescription, or I'd like you to lose 10 pounds, I'd like you to drink more water, get more rest, whatever. It could be a host of recommendations. If we were to say to the doctor, well, doctor, which of these recommendations should I implement first? Or which of these is going to give me the best response? Which of these is going to get rid of my symptoms first or fastest? Or how many months longer am I going to live because I implement 2 of these 5 recommendations or 3 of these 5? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that are being asked of us in the community around how do we support these practice adoptions that we can't answer. What's doctor? We really aren't able to answer dollars per acre response on these practices. We're still in disagreement as to what kind of samples. What I've got here is some of the things that we're doing as an organization. I'll just share this with you for your own benefit. You can take a look at our weekly blog if you want to see what is happening. When we get new information, when we finish a data analysis, when we arrive at a conclusion, we put it on our blog. We have a monthly webinar that's very popular. I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for those. They're a chance to interact. We usually have several hundred people on those, so you get a chance to see what's happening not only in our program, but what's happening across all of the soil health community. And we're starting a new podcast, People's Soil Health, something that personally I'm very interested in, and I'll be the host of that. So I'm really looking forward to working on that. I would say that in keeping with kind of the spirit of this organization and this event, it's all about working together. My job is really about building relationships with other people. Mostly it's people who are interested in what we're doing and the outcomes from what we're doing and opportunities that we can have to work together to achieve some goals. Sometimes it's an idea of advancing a certain number of acres into cover crops or reduced tillage. For some organizations, they want to find out how much carbon will you sequester if you change your practices in this way. So these are the kinds of things that I do on a daily basis, and it's really interesting to be involved in that, and the point of that is that we're doing this together. We're still working together to advance some of these things. I feel like my time here at SFA was really all of you helping me to get into that mindset of we're doing this together as a community. And so that's really the point that I bring back to you all. Keep this up, keep this farm-to-farmer networking component, keep this community together that has been built here. This is really strong and really very, very unique. Certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to stay in touch with anybody. I've had a number of conversations with you, some of you since I've had the chance to be among you, and so I certainly welcome that. That's my contact information there. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Ken, to come back and visit. And I'll be here for just a little bit longer if anybody's got a question that they want to ask.
We have 1 or 2 quick questions for John. Yeah, Harry. Okay.
So, John, at the national level, do you see any carbon credit type crediting with national corn growers or more crop roasters and other cover crops that are farmers getting paid for?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I did actually mean to cover that, and I did, so I appreciate that. Question is, where are we at with getting farmers paid for carbon credits? Okay. I'll give you a quick analogy. My thought on that, I mean, we're members of the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. They've said they're going to have a carbon market live by 2022. I've been to those meetings. I'm aware of how they're coming along with that. There are a number of components moving to make that happen. The key right now, in my view, is there is a widespread, I don't want to say disagreement, just disunity on how we're going to measure that. And to think about it, I like to think about it like this. Think way back to the first person who discovered gold in the ground, right? The first person who, so it's like it's different, but do we know how much it's worth? I mean, it's only worth something if I've discovered gold, I somehow have to convince Kent that it's worth something. Otherwise, it's not worth anything. It's just gold, right? And that's really what we're at. So if I dig out gold out of the ground today and I offer it to Kent, he might say, well, I found some gold yesterday. I got my own gold. I don't need your gold. Or I know somebody who found gold a year ago. Is that gold the same as yours? Well, it's not exactly the same. I got some impurities in mine. Right? Just think about that. Think about that whole process. When we talk about a carbon credit, we're talking about something that's kind of just pulled out of thin air, really. We're just saying this farm or this business or this entity has taken carbon and put it in the ground. It's been happening for millions of years, right? It's been happening all, and now all of a sudden we want to quantify it, capture it, grab a hold of it, and say it's worth something. So think about, it's great if you're a farmer and you think, okay, I'm doing something that's going to generate carbon credits. I'm going to be able to sell it. I don't know how much it's going to be worth, but I mean, I'm going to get paid for what I've been doing anyways. That's going to be all profit to me. Think about it from the perspective of the buyer. Think about it from a big carbon polluter like an airline, right? Delta Airlines, they're going to be in the market to buy carbon credits because they can't do anything to put carbon in the soil. They're constantly kicking carbon in the atmosphere all the time. I'm not picking on Delta. It's just that's where I fly. Anyways, I would say that they're a big, and then all the other airlines, right? So they're going to be looking to buy, they're not going to want to buy a carbon credit that has any chance that it got sold to someone else, or that has any chance that it's going to expire, or there's going to be some kind of backlash for them making that investment. So we're a long ways away from having that ironed out. I'm not saying it won't happen by 2022. I would say that there are some things that we've worked on to contribute answers to some of those questions. We had a number of our farms participate in an audit recently of a framework, carbon insetting framework that could be used by anybody who does have a market to verify and validate that carbon actually went into the soil. So again, we know what's happening when we build organic matter. We know it on our farms. You can walk out, and I know Grant and Don, you know you're putting carbon in the soil, but a buyer can evaluate that with you today. And so we're a long ways away from that. And unfortunately, the key here is we have to model this. We're not going to be able to measure it. There's too much to measure. So we have to model how these farming practices actually put the carbon in the soil. There's a lot of work to be done on figuring out what cover crop, how long, and what reduced tillage means to the amount of carbon. That's my opinion. But every day I'm having conversations with people that are, we're going to do this. So we're going to do it.
Follow up on that, I don't think that carbon credits will be worth much until the cap and trade policy. Delta might want to buy some carbon credits so they can go out to the world and say we're carbon neutral. But in that context, I don't think it will ever have the appropriate value. At least that's what I see. I don't know if you've got a different view on that.
Well, your point, the point that Joe's making is, will there be any value unless there's a cap and trade policy of some kind?
Correct.
And I would agree with you that the public policy aspect of this is just really getting started as well. So another thing we get roped into in our work is going before Capitol Hill and talking to these people about what we're doing and is it making a difference, and they're going to need those kinds of numbers in order to make those public policy steps and strides, because everything's a trade-off, right? And so if I'm going to advocate for this, that means I got to advocate for your thing over here. And so there's a lot of those kinds of conversations going on right now. I mentioned the Foundation for Food and Ag Research a month or so ago. I was in Washington, D.C. to meet with them, and they had a conference where we're talking about all the innovations in soil health. And Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, who's the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee and a big fan of soil health and a big fan of our organization, actually, was on stage with Al Gore. And Al Gore was talking about climate change and some of the things that he's been involved with, many of the things he's been involved with over the years. And he was interviewing her, was kind of the way it was set up. And she referenced the commodity groups and Soil Partnership as organizations that are digging into finding the answers that support these public policy initiatives. And so, again, this is coming. I do believe this is coming. And I'm not a public policy expert by any means. I'm kind of being asked to support those discussions. And I agree with you. There is not going to be one without some kind of public policy effort around this. Yes?
I was dismayed, though I knew that we did a rank high in, as a ranking of the states adopting cover crops. In the corn growers, what do you see as the biggest barrier to cover crop adoption or to soil health adoption overall? And how would you overcome that?
I think I've got a good one.
Can you repeat the question?
She's asking the $64,000 question, what's the biggest barrier to farmers adopting cover crops in Minnesota and beyond, right? Well, I think, first of all, because Minnesota wasn't on this, I wouldn't take too much concern over that, because Minnesota's a big state, not all of it's row crops. So that's part of that, I think, was that percentage basis. Secondly, you're going to get an unfiltered response. This is not the corn growers' response. This is not my organization's response. My response to this is that the biggest barrier to adoption is between our ears, and the mindset that it requires to say, I can do this. Right? I'm going to do this, even if it fails the first time. I'm going to do this. And I think, I've said this maybe too many times. If I'm overstating it, I don't care. I'm going to say it anyways. I think it's really important. When we ask anybody to do anything that requires this kind of a change, when we ask farmers to change the way they're practicing their operating, we ask them to change their rotation, or we ask them to change their tillage, ask them to change anything on their farm. We are asking them at a very basic level to change their relationships. There's going to be somebody you're going to have to start new. You're going to talk to a new seed dealer. You're going to talk to a new equipment dealer. You're going to talk to somebody new. You're going to talk to Kent. You didn't know Kent before, and all of a sudden he's knocking on your door and asking you to help you. You're going to join a group where other farmers are doing this. You're going to have new relationships. All right? Well, Facebook's got some study out there that we can only have about 30 active relationships in our lives. People that you interact with on an ongoing basis, right? There's only about 30. The average person can only manage about 30 people in their circle of friends and acquaintances. Now, I know some of you are looking at me like, what? I've got 1,000 Facebook friends. Yeah, I'm not talking about Facebook friends. They're monitoring this by saying who's really active among that friend group, right? And if you think about it, I don't really care. I don't care. You can wave your hands all afternoon. I don't care. I will be done when I'm done.
Everybody else is going to leave in 10 minutes.
That's fine. If y'all leave, I'm going to keep talking just so I can have my so we're really asking farmers, when we're asking them to make changes in what they do, we're also asking them to make changes in their relationships. And that's a real limiting factor. And so this whole thing you're doing here today where you have networking and you eat together and you have the tables where the experts are talking, and all of that is part of this story, right? Don't lose sight of that, and that's why this organization and this conference is effective. And with that,
you need to go, you said. So.
One more time, let's thank Joe. Jerry, Teresa, any final things? Evaluations, please. I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you had a great conference. Please drive safely home, and we'll see you next time. Take care.